What is the main reason the Vols can beat Georgia? And it just went up. So very incomplete voting to this point. Let me run a couple by you. Number one is home field advantage. Number two, psychological advantage. I think home field advantage speaks for itself, Caleb, but I want to throw psychological advantage at you. Georgia coming off a whipping of Ole Miss, if they ever feel too good or too boisterous about themselves, this would be, I would think, the week. Because they do have a tendency to play down to their opponents. They didn't last week. Tennessee coming off a loss to Missouri. From what I'm told, those guys were mad on Monday. The coaching staff, it was a big deal for them to go back to Missouri. Things didn't go well. They're mad now. The third option is the Vols defense will come together. And the fourth is just offense. It's Joe and O time. So Joe goes after the big O. No, I didn't say that. All right, so here we go. It is today's tough question brought to you by Andy Mason of andymasonrealestate.com. It is on the YouTube page. Please vote now, and we'll get your comments as well. And Rocky Top Tom, you're right. Star Wars got political, and they destroyed the series. I agree with that. All right, so
did they get political? I mean, I guess the prequels got political, but I thought the prequels were political in a good way. It was just they were poorly executed, but that's a different story.
Fair point. All right, so let me ask you, of those four reasons, before we talk about some of the big November wins with not much at stake, of those four reasons, what do you point to as number one, Caleb, of reasons that Tennessee can pull the upset? And it's just a 10-point dog. This is not out of the realm of possibility. But of those four reasons, kind of rank them for me, Caleb, but what do you think is most significant?
So number one is the psychological advantage, and the reason that's
I agree. And nobody's voted for that yet. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I think they may not vote for it because I think they may be confused that they may think we're talking about Tennessee, but we're actually talking about Georgia's psychological approach to this game too. I don't think Georgia's going to care that much about this game, or as much as they should. Now, John Adams disagrees with us. He thinks there are two types of ways you play, Dave, and you know this. When you win a big game like Georgia did against Ole Miss last week, it could be you're either starting to peak at the right time, whereas Tennessee's starting to valley at the right time. So it could be a trend. I think that's where Adams is. Or it could be you put all of this into one game and then you're going to take a week off the next week. I think it's the latter with Georgia. Don't you? I don't think it's like Georgia's just starting to come together right now.
Yeah, and do me a favor. Can you pull up Georgia's regular season November last year? I mean, I remember them playing down to a bunch of opponents during the season. I don't necessarily remember them peaking up. So, I mean, that's something that I would like to get into before we get into the biggest wins in November without a championship at stake. So, who did they close out the season with last year, other than, of course, LSU in the SEC championship game? How did they finish the year?
This was so difficult for them last year. I mean, in November, they had to play Tennessee when they were number one, but then they had to play Mississippi State and Kentucky and Georgia Tech. That was just a brutal road. I'm kidding.
So we can basically draw no conclusions from those three opponents, right? I mean, I don't care if you tell me it's 23-20 or it's 56-10. That's either Georgia playing down to the opponent or Georgia playing up and has a sense of pride. So I don't know that we can draw anything from that. And I'm wondering why my name tag there says Caleb Calhoun, because there's only one Caleb Calhoun and I fixed it and I'm Dave Hooker. All right. Biggest wins in November without a championship at stake. Caleb, what are those?
So for those who wonder if Tennessee is going to be up for this game, if they're not up for this game.
May I interrupt?
Yes.
I can go ahead and guarantee you, based off people I've talked to, that they will be up for this game. They will play. Okay, I'm not saying they'll play perfect, but the hair on fire term that we like to use on this channel, there will be hair on fire. They will play hard. Inside information brought to you by Andy Mason, andymasonrealestate.com. 40 years of experience with Andy Mason, and the best price is the best service in the biz. And I interrupted. andymasonrealestate.com. Caleb, sir?
It's fine. All I was going to say was because if they're not up for this game, they are disrespecting a sacred history for Tennessee football. If fans are not up for this game, they are disrespecting a sacred history for Tennessee football, which is some of Tennessee's greatest November wins happened either with the championship mathematically off the table like it is now, or basically off the table like you knew they weren't winning one. Most notably, 1991, the Miracle at South Bend. That happened after Tennessee lost to Florida and Alabama on the year. That was Andy Kelly's senior year. You don't think Andy Kelly was mentally wrecked over the fact that he was never going to beat Alabama? That was his last chance, that he wasn't going to win a national title when he thought he had a shot, and there was no SEC title on the table that year. But you know what he did? He and Carl Pickens and Aaron Hayden came up. They went to Notre Dame, and even though they didn't win a national title, they ruined a national title season for Notre Dame in one of the most legendary wins in Tennessee football history. Do you think that win has any less magnitude, Dave, because Tennessee didn't win a championship that year?
No. In fact, I still see the guys that played on that team. They post about it each and every year, according as well as Mike Stoll. So, no, I think that win has every bit the impact and the longevity of had they been in a championship run. I think you would still look back and say let's say they were in the run for an SEC championship and that had no effect whatsoever. You would still look back and you would say, oh, you remember the Miracle at South Bend? That was incredible. Oh, by the way, they were also in the midst of making a run for a championship. I mean, I think that game stands on its own. Great point.
Yeah. Another one, the most memorable win for Tennessee at home by many, according to many, before last year's Alabama game. One of their only other wins over a number one team. They have, I think, 3 or 4. 1959 LSU. You know about that game, Dave, right? Historically, where Tennessee stopped Billy Cannon when LSU tried to go for 2 in the win. It was the original stop in college football.
Right.
Tennessee beat number 1 LSU 14-13. It was like a 6-4, 5-5 team. Go look at their record. They weren't a good team. But you know what? That doesn't lessen the magnitude of beating LSU in 59. You covered this game, Dave, 2003 Miami. Now, Tennessee did what wasn't a 3-way tie for the East, but they had already lost to Georgia and Auburn that year. Did that stop them from putting in everything they had to go beat Miami in 2003 on the road?
No, that was Philip Fulmer's best coached game of his career. Period. End of discussion. Top me on that message board.
You're right. I mean, I think 98 Florida would be close too, though.
98 Florida's close. 2001 Florida is close. But when you talk about that 2003 team, I thought it was the most overmatched of any of those 3 that we had. I thought the talent differential was close in the other 2. I thought that Miami was 2 levels better than Tennessee roster-wise.
Yeah, you're right. If you look at
you remember at the end of that first half when they lined so that's like the Hail Mary time.
Yeah, with Jason Allen.
Yeah, so they run every receiver to the left. This is how talented they were. They ran a Hail Mary to a guy that you may have heard of. I'm a soldier. They ran a Hail Mary to a tight end on the short side of the field instead of the 3 receivers that were at their left. And if you look back, the last play at the half, Kellen Winslow Jr. almost went over and made an incredible catch that would have been a touchdown, and Tennessee doesn't win that game. That's how talented, my point is, that's how talented that Miami team was. That was Vince Wilfork back in the day. That was Ken Dorsey, who's looking for a job, right?
Sean Taylor. No, that wasn't Ken Dorsey. No, that was Brock Berlin, who Tennessee should thank for winning that game, because Brock Berlin had Kellen Winslow on an easy touchdown crossing route, but he threw it too late, and Mark Jones hits Brock Berlin, and he throws the interception to Jabril Wilson. I'm sure you remember that play, Dave.
I do remember that play. Look at Smoky Mountain Red saying, Caleb getting me pumped up, preach. Go ahead and click that like and subscribe button. This is still a football game. This is not some parade of Georgia being the next national champion. And this is in Neyland Stadium. This is doable. Melissa said, it's said if you can't run with the big dogs, stay under the porch. This team's not going to stay under the porch. This team's going to play incredibly hard from everybody I've talked to.
3 more ancient upsets before we move on, and they are kind of ancient, but I still have to bring them up. 1950, Tennessee, Kentucky, one of the greatest home wins in Tennessee history. Kentucky's number 3. It's the greatest Kentucky team in history, led by one young Bear Bryant. They're supposed to win the national championship. They've already clinched the SEC championship and the Sugar Bowl. They go visit Tennessee. That's the year I told you that the great Appalachian Storm of 1950 hits, Dave. And Tennessee fans smartly decide, we're not going to shovel Neyland Stadium today. And so Kentucky has 12 fumbles in the game, and Tennessee wins 7-0. 1972, Tennessee beat number 5 Penn State at home after they weren't going to win the SEC. And then here's a big one. Here's where your Nico talk comes in, Dave. 1965, Tennessee hasn't won it's Doug Dickey's second year. They've already lost out on the SEC. They got just some random late game against a number 5 ranked UCLA team in Memphis. Doug Dickey throws caution to the wind and brings in this young quarterback by the name of Dewey Warren to lead a game-winning drive to beat Tommy Protho and UCLA 37-34. That marked the arrival of Tennessee football under Doug Dickey that game. And that was with no championship. And then lastly, 2 years ago, Tennessee had nothing to play for. Heupel's first year, they go and beat a top 20 Kentucky team on the road in November. So if you can't get up to play a big game in November because you have no championship on the table, you shouldn't be playing football.
Amen. You got leadership issues, and I don't think this team does.